Hey everyone, Luke and Nigel here, and welcome to Crime Zone. As most of you know, Nigel and I try to release 3 new videos each and every week. However, Nigel has been really sick the past few days and unable to write or record any new material. With that said, and with Kevin Bacon currently in the news revealing how he lost most of his fortune to the infamous Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, we'd like to share one of our first ever unpublished videos with some new audio.
Though you may not have heard of the man himself, chances are you've heard of his namesake crime. A Ponzi scheme is a form of fraud where investors are lured in with the promise of high profits, and work by paying earlier investors with the money from more recent ones. The scheme works as long as there is a constant flow of investors, and most still have confidence in the business and do not demand full repayment. Despite not being the first person to commit such a crime, con artist Charles Ponzi's name became synonymous with this kind of fraud due to the notoriety of his case. In the 1920s, Ponzi scammed investors out of more than $20 million, using a fraudulent investment scheme involving postal reply coupons. It started when Ponzi noticed a legitimate loophole. The coupons, which were intended to be used to obtain postage stamps to reply to international mail, could technically be exchanged for a higher value in the US than their country of origin. Ponzi sold this idea as an investment opportunity, offering clients a 50 to 100% profit if they would give him the money to buy these postal reply coupons. The scheme was far from realistic, as Ponzi never figured out a way to convert the coupons to cash efficiently. It is estimated that in order to actually make a profit, Titanic-sized ships filled with the postal coupons would have had to have been shipped to the US from Europe. Despite this, the money kept rolling in, and Ponzi found that for the most part, he could cover the old investment profits with the money from new investors, as most people kept reinvesting their money anyway. During his scam, he lived lavishly, spending the money of his investors before the operation eventually collapsed. The size and damage of these schemes has only continued to grow since the days of Charles Ponzi, with the largest such example being the 2008 case of Bernie Madoff, which is estimated to have resulted in losses around $65 billion. Though many of these Ponzi schemes are relatively simple cases of investment managers promising returns that are too good to be true, there are some stranger Ponzi schemes that have emerged over the years. Today, we want to take a look at some of these strange cases, focusing on Ponzi schemes from all over the world that, in addition to being criminal, are also pretty bizarre. Before we get to our list, don't forget to subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest videos. With that out of the way, here is our list of 7 of the world's strangest Ponzi schemes.
In 2014, Arlen Galbraith was convicted for masterminding a pigeon breeding Ponzi scheme that cost investors an estimated $20 million. The scam targeted Canadian and US farmers, mostly Mennonites, Amish, and Hutterites, and offered them lucrative returns in exchange for buying and breeding the birds. Though Galbraith initially told farmers he intended to sell the pigeons to hobbyists interested in them for sport, by the time his scheme collapsed in 2008, the narrative had ballooned to a wild story about a network of pigeon farms whose meat would be sold to the rival chicken industry. However, neither of these stories was true, as Galbraith was simply taking the offspring of the birds to use as new breeding pairs to attract more investors, using their money to cover his millions of dollars in obligations to older investors. Unlike many of the others on this list, Arlen Galbraith is unique because he didn't appear to have spent much, if any, of the money on himself, something he later attempted to use in his defense. Though it's not clear whether he initially intended to defraud investors, by the end he was running a full-scale Ponzi operation, and its collapse left both him and many of his clients bankrupt. The Pigeon King was sentenced to 7 years in prison in 2014.
In 2014, 63-year-old DePaul Wanakawat pled guilty to running a Ponzi scheme that scammed investors out of tens of millions of dollars. The former owner of the Sacramento Capitals tennis team had taken anywhere from $50 to $125 million from more than 200 investors through his companies IMG and RelyAid, which he claimed had a lucrative contract supplying latex gloves to the US Department of Veterans Affairs. In addition to this contract, which Wanakawat claimed amounted to more than $125 million, he also told investors that IMG and RelyAid had annual sales in excess of more than $100 million. In reality, the company's sales were roughly $5 million per year, and the contract with the VA amounted to only $25,000. Wanakwat was able to keep the scheme going by enticing new investors with IMG and RelyAid's alleged success, showing them the fraudulent earnings numbers to make them look like sound investments. He would then pay old investors with the money from these new investors. Wanakwat was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and in 2015 he was ordered to pay more than $100 million in restitution to victims of his scheme.
Perhaps the strangest thing about the MoneyTron Ponzi scheme was the man behind it. Jean-Pierre von Rossum was by all accounts an enigmatic man, a Marxist anarchist with a reportedly serious drug addiction who worked at various times as a novelist, politician, and economist. But his biggest accomplishment was arguably the staggering $860 million he scammed out of investors by claiming his company MoneyTron could offer them endless returns. Rossum claimed that he had developed a model that could predict the stock market and beat the capitalist system, making huge sums of money in the process. However, the only money that ever existed was what he received from his clients, who at the height of the scam included many of the wealthiest people in Europe, such as the Belgian royal family. While spending extravagantly on yachts, planes, a Formula One racing team, and over 100 Ferraris, Rossum managed to keep the scam going by giving the money of new clients to early investors. When the Ponzi scheme finally unraveled and Rossum was convicted, he was far from remorseful, however, claiming that his fraud was a way to destroy the system and that his clients were at fault for believing him. He spent just 5 years in prison.
Masterminded by lifelong con artist Joel Steiner, the Mutual Benefits Corporation was a Ponzi scheme that fraudulently engaged in the selling of something called viatical settlements. In its most common form, a viatical settlement involves a terminally ill patient selling their life insurance policy to a third party so that they can obtain some of that money before their death. That third party is a broker, who then sells the policy to investors, using some of that money for the premiums on the life insurance policy until the patient's death, when the policy pays out and the investors and the broker make their money. Though it may sound somewhat morbid, in a perfect world, the patient receives a lump sum payment, and both the broker and investors make their money. However, Steiner's Mutual Benefits Corporation was far from legitimate. From the very beginning, Steiner's name had to be kept off of corporate documents, having been previously banned from trading securities for earlier crimes. Instead, Steiner relied on the help of his friend Peter Lombardi to act as president of the company. During its 10 years of operation, the Mutual Benefits Corporation engaged in several frauds to keep its scheme going, selling participation shares in these life insurance policies, where they either lied about the life expectancies of patients or created fraudulent policies altogether. Throughout the scheme, new investment money was used to pay out earlier investors. In all, upwards of 30,000 people were entangled in the Ponzi scheme, losing an estimated $834 million. In 2014, Joel Steiner received a 20-year prison sentence, followed by many of his other associates, including President of Mutual Benefits Corporation, Peter Lombardi.
In the 1990s, Gerald Payne conned 18,000 people out of an estimated $500 million through his evangelical Christian ministry called Greater Ministries International. Claiming his program was based on the Gospel of St. Luke, Payne told church members that they could double their money in under 2 years, though included the clever caveat that if they didn't make their money back, it was because God was punishing them. Still, he claimed most true believers would make money. According to Payne, the cash was to be invested in gold and diamond mines in Liberia, where he had connections to the president of the country. He also told members that Greater Ministries International planned to build a Christian theocracy on an island in the Bahamas, a plan he alleged to have cleared with the United Nations. Of course, all of this was a lie, and aside from some minor investments in failed mining operations in Liberia and a serious stockpile of weapons back in the US, investors found little proof that GMI was a legitimate investment opportunity. What little success early members of the church seemed to have was in fact simply the money of new investors. In March of 2001, Gerald Payne was sentenced to 27 years in prison.
In 2006, a man named MS Guru founded Susi Emu Farms in the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu. The 6-year-long operation would defraud an estimated 12,000 to 20,000 investors, becoming one of India's most notorious and strangest Ponzi schemes. Susi Farms was sold to investors as an emu breeding operation. The money would be used to raise the birds, and the resulting eggs and meat would be sold to restaurants, while the hides would be processed into leather. After an initial deposit, investors were told they could expect a hefty profit within 2 years. To build confidence in the scheme, MS Guru and his accomplices even opened their own chain of restaurants, inviting celebrities and politicians to ribbon-cutting ceremonies. They also paid early investors the large returns that they had promised to attract more. As word spread of the company's supposed success, a staggering amount of money began flowing in, despite constant warnings from the Indian government that there was no commercial demand for emu meat or products, and that the business model of Susi Farms was highly questionable. Sure enough, MS Guru was keeping the scheme afloat by paying old investors with the money from new investors, as Susi Farms never even established facilities for the killing and processing of the birds. When the scam collapsed in 2012, it affected more than just the thousands of investors in Susi Farms, but also the many copycat businesses that had opened up on the back of the company's success and were now also hastily closing their doors. In addition, the Indian government was now tasked with taking care of tens of thousands of unwanted emus. MS Guru was arrested in 2012, but it took the Indian government more than 4 years to process all of the cases resulting from the Susi Farms Ponzi scheme.
The Yilishen group and its founder Wang Fengyu were responsible for one of the most infamous Ponzi schemes in Chinese history. In 1999, the company began advertising itself as an exciting investment opportunity, a health products business whose main ingredients were ants. Investors were offered a significant return if they purchased and raised boxes of black mountain ants to maturity, which the company would buy back to make its products. In the early days of the company, some investors reported returns between 30 and 60%, and this, coupled with endorsements from several Chinese celebrities, drove thousands more to invest. The apparent success meant that many investors even used their profits to buy more ants from the company. During this time, founder Wang Fengyu was also praised by several members of the Chinese government as one of the country's entrepreneurial leaders. Though it is unclear how much of the sales were legitimate, by 2007 the business was collapsing, and it became apparent that he was using the money of new investors to pay the lucrative returns the company had promised to its ant farmers. By November of that year, he was unable to pay profits to any of these investors. He was arrested a month later following a riot that saw more than 200,000 investors protesting the company. In all, more than 1 million people invested in the Ponzi scheme, resulting in the loss of billions of Chinese yuan.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.